All right. Will you start by telling us your name and then spelling it for us?
My name is Mal, M-A-L, Middlesworth, M-I-D-D-L-E-S-W-O-R-T-H.
All right. What was your rank and in what branch of the military?
I'm a Marine. At the time of the attack, I was a buck private. I came over to Pearl Harbor in early October, about 2 months before the attack.
What age were you?
I was 18 years old.
Will you tell us in your story what your experience, in your words, what your experience was?
Well, on December 7th, let me say this, on battleships, aircraft carriers, and cruisers, they had Marine detachments. And we had about 40 Marines on a ship that had about 1,200 sailors. And on December 7th, I had the 8 in the morning watch to 12. And what you did on the 8 to 12 watch was to raise the colors, the flag on the back, the fantail of the ship. And I was coming up from the Marine quarters across the well deck, which is in the center of the ship, and I looked over and heard all this noise and racket on Ford Island, which was just across the way. And I thought, what are those crazy sailors doing on Sunday? Sunday and weekends were normally very quiet. I thought, that looks kind of dangerous. Well, we had 2 SO-3 scout planes on the heavy cruiser, and we used to fire them off, and then go out and scout. They were very slow planes with pontoons. The ship would turn and make a wake when they came in for a landing. They'd come in for a landing, and then put them on a hook and boost them back up in these catapults. So we had 2 of these. Well, as I came across the well deck, I went into the hangar where we stored the airplanes. The planes weren't on the ship at that time. And after hearing the noise over on Ford Island, I walked through the hangar. As soon as I got on the other side, opened the hatch, torpedo planes were headed for the battleships. We were at a location called 1010 Dock, directly across from the battleships. And a couple of torpedo planes came in about 30, 40 feet from us, and there were 2 men in the Japanese torpedo plane, a pilot, and then there was a rear gunner who also served as a radio man. And the gunner was firing, it sounded like a coffee grinder or a very small machine gun to me, but I noticed they were spraying shots around our feet. So we kind of ran around and got protection from the turret that was on the fantail. We had 3 turrets of 8-inch guns, 3 to a turret. We had 2 turrets up front and 1 in the back of the ship. And I was 18 years old, and it was funny because when I was 10 years old, I read a story written by an Army general named General Billy Mitchell, and he told exactly how the Japanese were going to attack us. And the Japanese followed his plan almost to a T. So I wasn't surprised that we were going to be attacked, but I wasn't prepared for it to be that day.
Did you think it was just an exercise at first?
Of course, nobody was prepared. Sunday, well, it was good duty in Hawaii. The only problem was there were close to 85,000 military troops on shore. It was a little hard to find a girlfriend.
Yeah.
What
I would
did
think you were a little outnumbered.
Yes.
What did you do after the attack? Where did you go?
Well, I had the duty. I had to stay with the duty officer till noon. But what our shipmates did is they took our motor launches and whale boats and went into the burning oil and got out people who were swimming there. Our ship didn't have any fuel or ammunition because we were in for repairs, and you do a lot of welding under those circumstances, so you don't want any fuel or gunpowder around.
Yeah, that
But
makes sense.
then the rest of our crew went over on the New Orleans, which is on the other side of the dock, and helped them.
So you guys were not hit directly.
No, we had very little damage. They were after the battleships, and they wanted to get the two carriers, but that they knew were supposed to be in port. But fortunately, one of the carriers was coming back from Wake Island, where they had just delivered planes, and the other one was delayed by a storm.
That was a blessing. Huh?
So the first planes off one of the carriers came in, and of course we shot them down, our own planes, because from the attack, there were two attacks, and anything that moved was shot at. The Marine captain called me into his quarters and asked me to take a message up to the Marine barracks. And I thought about it, and I didn't have any stripes. I was a buck private. I didn't think he'd put me in the brig too long. Only time I ever questioned an order, and I said, "Captain Henderson, how far do you think I'll get?" I don't know if he thought I was the most expendable in the detachment or the fastest runner. But he looked at me and said, "Well, you're probably right. I'll find another way." That's the only time I ever questioned an officer's response or assignment.
How long did you stay in the military?
I got out as soon as I could get out. I had enough points to get out 3.5 times. The USS San Francisco and cruisers were the biggest ships in the Pacific Fleet at that time, because all the battleships are sitting on the bottom, with the exception of the carriers. So it was the aircraft carriers, the cruisers, both light and heavy, and the destroyers that won and fought all the battles during 1942. I was on the San Francisco 27.5 months, and I never saw a battleship. In one night battle off Guadalcanal, our ship received 4 Congressional Medals of Honor and a raft of Navy Stars and other awards.
Wow.
And our ship had 17 major battle stars, and that's second only to one of the carriers, who had 19. So our heavy cruiser took the brunt of the fighting in the Pacific. We used to go head to head with the Japanese. In fact, around Guadalcanal, we went up against 2 battleships, and eventually the 2 battleships were sunk.
Wow. Great. How many times have you been here since?
Well, Pearl Harbor survivors normally have a convention here every 5th year, and I've been coming here since the 50th.
Okay.
I was the longest serving president of the association, and I'm the editor of the Pearl Harbor Graham, our international publication. So communication is an important part of any corporation, and that's how our members get the word of this convention. We've been promoting this convention for about 2 years.
How many survivors do you think are here today?
We have a little over 100 survivors, but we have 700 registration.
Okay.
So there's family groups that come. The gentleman I was just sitting with have brought over 25 people. Some have 12. In the other cases, there will be 2 or 3 who are caregivers. Because one friend of mine from Wisconsin is on oxygen and in a wheelchair. And he came over and he got a caregiver, plus his son and daughter-in-law are here.
Why do you think it's so important to keep you guys together and have you meet like this?
Well, the number of reasons we meet, our motto is, remember Pearl Harbor, keep America alert. And one of the major problems that we tried to solve in most history books in high school, there's about a quarter of a page on Pearl Harbor, and half of that is a picture of the Arizona. So for years we've gone into schools. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I use with the kids, and I have my own website. So it's the young people who are interested in reaching. Unfortunately now, we have so few survivors who can do that. Now our San Diego chapter was a large chapter because they have a large military population, has talked to almost 100,000 students over the years.
Wonderful.
And now, across the country, a lot of high schools have started with Pearl Harbor survivors, then they included people from Vietnam and the previous wars. And in Riverside, California, they have a school called M.L. King, and they have a program each year that's M.L. King Remembers. And if you want to be interviewed, you have to give them a biography of what you did before the war, after the war, and during the war. And we sit at tables of 4 students. It's a pretty good sized high school. Junior class, when they take history in California, I don't know how it is in Tennessee. So we sit at a table of 4 students and 1 veteran. And they go over our biography beforehand, so they're well prepared for questions.
That's great. That's really great.
Well, we're concerned about the younger generation, because he who forgets history will probably make the same mistakes again.
To repeat it, right?
That's a paraphrase of the famous quote, but if you don't remember the history of what went on, you're going to make the same mistakes again.
What do you think the mistakes were
Mistakes when?
leading
To Pearl Harbor? Well, first of all, the Navy never thought that the Japanese could reach Pearl Harbor. They knew something was going on. In fact, the only people in Pearl Harbor who were prepared were the children of officers. Their school is closer to the Arizona than any other ship. Fortunately, it was Sunday, so they weren't in school. But they must have heard things at the dinner table or sometime, because they got into the Admiral's home basement. They put in blankets, food, and water. So I always say the children of the officers, the children of Pearl Harbor, were better prepared than the grown-ups. And we have an organization called Sons and Daughters of Pearl Harbor Survivors. And there's also a group of the sons and daughters who were actually here. Some were 6 years old, some were 13 years old. It didn't make any difference how old they were. They were putting shells in the machine gun They were hauling ammunition. They were every child on the island was
And we
doing
forget
something.
about the people who just lived here.
Yes. Well, the civilian population suffered greatly. People always think of the military,
Right.
but it affected a lot of families. Here, for example, no longer would they let locals other than Americans work on the docks.
Oh,
And all those families that had good, well-paying jobs on the docks weren't allowed to go on the docks anymore.
really?
So
For their safety?
well, they thought they would sabotage. And it was greatly over-exaggerated, but it
They didn't
cost,
know who to trust at that time.
no, and it cost a lot of affluent, dedicated civilians most of their earnings. It was a hardship on a lot of the civilian public population at the time. Often most people talk about the military, but they forget about the harm it did to the civilian population.
Yeah. So, what does it mean to you to come here? What does this memorial mean to you?
Well, the first thing we come to Hawaii for is to conduct the business of the association.
Right. But personally, what?
But personally, we come to memorialize those who didn't make it on December 7th, but also who have left us since that time.
Yeah.
That's what it means. And also the fellowship that we have with the people. There are 3 people from my ship here. 2 of them I had never met before.
Really?
And the fellowship of our unique military operation. To be a member, you had to be on the island of Oahu at 7:55 on December 7th, 1941. We're not like the American Legion or the Veterans of Foreign Wars. You either were here or you weren't. So nobody, once we're gone, nobody's gonna, our organization will vanish.
But all of the children that you've spoken to will carry that on.
Yes, and the Pacific Historic Parks that helps the Park Service, they invite teachers over
Oh,
for 2 weeks training here. And they also have closed circuit television to schools around the world. Most of them in the United States. But if you want to, there's a way you can contact the Pacific Historic Parks,
okay.
and they'll set up a closed circuit television between you and your school.
Great. Well, we got that on video, so we'll definitely be.
Well, that'd be great.
Yeah.
They do it. It's expensive, but they do it. If you've got a way, if you've got a television set there,
Okay.
they'll pay for the transformation of the show over and everything. That's one thing to look for.
We'll do that.
Okay,
Thank you so much
Well,
for
thank
talking with us.
thank you.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service. Thank you for
Well, thank you for your interest.
thank you for all that you've done since then to educate.
That's where our emphasis has been.
We appreciate it.